Wakey, 6 o'clock on the nose, and you're bang on time for AM Live. Of course, today we have in the market, and in today's installment, we shall be looking at the state of economy, how it is right now, comparing, of course, where we left last year. It's a new year. Going forward, are we also operating on a very healthy ground as it is? We are also joined this morning by Sir George Washuri. Good morning, sir. Good to see you.
Good morning.
Who's the founder and CEO of the Optivent Group. We shall be also telling us more of what is really happening in the real estate sector as far as the economy is concerned. A lot that we'll be discussing today with the rest of the panelists who will be joining us much later in the course of the program. And I'll be introducing them much later when they're here. But good to see you, sir.
Good to see you.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Yes. You look optimistic. Things, yeah, there is this sky in the what is it? Pie in the sky, optimism.
Okay,
they call it.
They say that the 2020 is the new levels, new grounds, new markets.
New levels, new grounds, new market.
Yes.
Fantastic. And that's what we shall be also telling us more about it, especially in the real estate sector as well. We know the small traders have been slapped with, of course, the turnover tax. That is anyone operating below 5 million shillings, then they have to pay 3% sales tax. What is your view about that, just briefly?
I think it's important that the government, massage these small traders, because these are the people who create jobs. They create actually 90% of our jobs. So putting more taxes on them, I think, is discouraging them. So the government should be able to come up with policies that encourages these small traders. And we'll be discussing more to see, maybe to help the government on how they can do it to ensure that these people are able to be empowered, so that they can be able to survive. Otherwise, remember they have presumptive tax, the one for 15%.
Yes.
And now this additional 3%. So it's a burden after burden.
Burden after
and I think
burden.
it's not very good for the economy.
And they're saying, of course, this the sales tax shall come of when they've given now the sales tax. Also, the presumptive tax will be after
because they charge the 15% when they're giving the licenses. And I think they should use that as counting the number of smaller businesses as opposed to charging them tax, because already they are now charging 3%. And I think it's not too good for about 1.56 million smaller businesses in Kenya.
Right.
Yes.
But of course, also KRA will be sending spies also to your companies as well. If you've not been remitting your taxes as well, be on the know that the big brother from KRA will be spying on you as well. We shall be discussing this with the panelists much later in the course of the program. But for now, let's just get a quick snapshot of the dailies today. We begin with the Daily Nation. This is what is on the front page of the Daily Nation. Where was Ruto as Uhuru's sacked ally? That is a probing question today on the front page of the Daily Nation. Aid says Deputy President had no role in function where changes were announced. DP slipped across the border to Sudan, allegedly to visit a chicken farm, having failed to get air clearance on Monday. Long gone are the days of matching outfits and bromance at State House. Things are falling apart. The story is well fleshed out for you on page 4 of the Daily Nation this morning. Also, Matiang'i plans tough measures to crack down on terror and drugs. You can see him here. While he says, well, we have respect for the rule of law. When cleanup time comes, we shall make no distinction between the enemy and those who harbor them. That is what he's saying. And the story continues on page 8 of the Daily Nation. Today, the government plans to step up the war against terror cells. Ultimate Citizen Services launch a ruthless war on drug cartels, introduce digital driving licenses, and reduce time taken to acquire crucial registration documents to 1 day. This, as some of the resolutions made yesterday in Mombasa during a high-profile security meeting led by Interior Cabinet Secretary Fred Matiang'i. The CS sent a warning to people protecting terrorists, saying nothing will stop the government from attaining its security objectives. You have this story continuing on page 8 of the Daily Nation today, and you can see him holding court here with the Inspector General of Police Hilary Mutyambai at a briefing in Mombasa yesterday. Let's move on and we see what also we have on the front page of the Daily Nation on the side, but their fears as locusts march on. The insects have spread to Laikipia amid fears of aerial spraying not bearing fruit. You have the story continuing on page 10 of the Daily Nation today. And budget cuts to hit ministries. This is on the back page of the Daily Nation today. State to cut spending by 100 billion shillings to reflect depressed revenue streams. And we shall be looking at that as well much later in the course of the program. Remember, last year we saw also reports that the government, especially the ministries had spent close to £1 billion shillings just on entertainment, and that was in 3 months. So will this also make a discernible difference? All right, that is yet to be seen, but you can grab a copy of the Daily Nation for that particular story today. That is the Daily Nation. Let's see what the Standard is holding for us, and this is what you're waking up to this morning on the front page of the Standard. Where is my Standard this morning? There you go, the Standard today, outsider in government. This is what the Standard is holding today. Things fall apart, it says here. Constitutionally, Ruto is a second in command in government, yet today he's a spectator, with civil servants and politicians around the center of power treating him with contempt. I selected, this is some of the listed maybe points they put here. Public appearance with the president have drastically reduced, right? 2, the president keeps quiet as some ministers and MPs attack him. Also, thirdly, the BBA campaign has framed him as the obstacle to a new Kenya. Also, some Jubilee Party officials have publicly derided his presidential ambitions. 5th, he is routinely humiliated by Interior Ministry bosses and was recently locked out of his official residence in Mombasa. 6, his staunchest supporters have been purged from cabinet and others silenced. So this is how the situation is on the ground right now, and you can grab a copy of the Standard as well to just follow this particular story. Also, here's just a caption of a tweet that he had tweeted. He said on Twitter, "So our democracy is so liberal that the SG of the ruling party has become the chief strategist of the opposition." Maajabu. And that is just showcasing what is really happening within Jubilee. And also we have Matiang'i here, Interior Cabinet Secretary, responding to attacks from MPs allied to the DP at a fundraiser in Kirinyaga in November, where he said, "We don't like rubbish because work must be done. We were given work by the president, just like a country. A home is headed by one man. We work for Uhuru Kenyatta. If he tells us this is how we should work, that is what we do." Also, we have Nakuru Senator Susan Kihika. After she was barred from a presidential function in Nakuru on Tuesday, she said, quote unquote, "We were informed that there were orders from above that we cannot be allowed entry because we belong to an unwanted function." And this is just a snippet of how it looked there. You can grab a copy of the Standard this morning. Can't find a job. State says it created 850,000 slots. The economy generated 843,900 new jobs last year, despite a cash crisis that saw several businesses send workers home, says new Treasury report. That is yet to be debated, and we shall be slicing and dicing this with our panelists here in the market this morning. But this is how the Standard looks today. Let's try and see what we have on the front page of the Star. And this is what you're waking up to the front page of the Star today. Kenyatta elbows Ruto, takes over crucial ministries. That is a splash today on the front page of the Star. 2013 cabinet had near 50-50 share of influential dockets. Uhuru now has 16 cabinet secretaries on his side, leaving deputy president with only 5 out of 21 ministries. The story continues on page 4 and 5, and you can see the spread of their faces as well on the front page of the Star today. And on the side with their IDs, passports to be issued in a day, says Matiang'i. Security enhanced as Dusit marks attack anniversary. And that story continues on page 11 of the Star this morning. People Daily is up next, and this is what you're waking up to the front page of the People Daily. And just scroll over there quickly. And it says how Uhuru sent DP team back to drawing board. It seems all the headlines are particularly intent on what is really happening within the Jubilee administration right now. This is the bromance between President Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy, William Ruto. New strategy. Now that President has addressed agriculture and economic grievances that brought rebel Mount Kenya MPs together, the pro-Ruto group will have to create new rallying call. And this story continues on page 6 of the People Daily today. On the side with them, Matiang'i, you will soon get your IDs, passports in a day. Minister unveils 10-point plan to restore security services sector and defeat terrorists. You can follow the story on page 4 of the People Daily today. In the Business Hub, good news for milk farmers as producer price raised to 33 shillings per litre. And we can follow this story on page 16 of the People Daily this morning. Right? I meant to verify that if it's 33 or 13 shillings, we can follow the story inside the People Daily this morning. Let's move on and we see what we have on the front page of Taifa Leo. And Taifa Leo is holding this. So all the dailies today is on Ruto and President Uhuru Kenyatta. Ruto azimwa kusafiri Sudan. Right, that is another new development there. Duru karibu na naibu rais zadai ndege aliyokuwa atumie kwenda Sudan ilikosa kibali cha kuondoka Jumatatu. That is a story that is on the front page of Taifa Leo. Maybe just to read a snippet of it here. Naibu Rais William Ruto alilazimika kuahirisha safari yake ya kwenda Sudan mnamo Jumatatu baada ya kunyimwa kibali. Alikuwa amepanga safari hiyo kwenda kujionea ufugaji kuku unavyofanywa katika shamba moja jijini Khartoum. And the story continues on page 2 of Taifa Leo this morning. And of course, he's been particularly intent on his chicken farm. Maybe just going to also benchmark and see what is happening in other countries as far as the chicken farming is concerned, which is raking in a lot of good tidings for him, I should say, eye-popping figures a day. KUPPET yataka walimu wapewe mafunzo ya kijeshi silaha. That is another story that you can follow also inside Taifa Leo this morning. Let's see what the Business Daily is holding for us, and this is what you're waking up to this morning. State deepens austerity with 100 billion shillings budget cuts. The newly confirmed Treasury CS pushes ahead with his drive to reduce wasteful spending in state agencies as process of preparing next budget gathers pace. That is what we have on the front page of the Business Daily today. We shall be looking at this much later in the course of the program with our panelist. Also, Tulo capital expenditure is here. Kenya versus global total. That is says Tulo's spending in Kenya to fall by 43% is a sidebar story here on the front page of the Business Daily today. And new prices, right? It says here that new milk prices, the new Agriculture Cabinet Secretary, Mr. Peter Munya, can be seen here addressing a press conference at his Kilimo House office yesterday after he replaced Mr. Mwangi Kiunjuri, who was sacked by President Uhuru Kenyatta on Tuesday. With him is Crop Development and Agriculture Research Principal Secretary Hamadi Boga. Mr. Munya directed the new KCC to start paying farmers 33 shillings for a litre of milk. That is a story that continues on page 5. This confirms also my doubt. Yes, there is the new pricing there. Also, counties collect 7.7 billion shillings taxes in 3 months. Revenue collection by the 47 counties hit 7.71 billion shillings in the first quarter of the current fiscal year. Official data has shown the highest over a similar period since the inception of devolved system of governance in 2013 and pointing to improved efficiency. You can follow the story on page 4 of the Business Daily this morning. Let's see what is on the ticker today. Titanium miner offers additional 2.1 billion shillings royalties. Australian mining firm Bears Resources is ready to pay 21.4 billion, that is $1 million, that is 2.1 billion shillings in additional royalties to the Kenyan government in exchange for refund of values of value-added tax. The story continues on page 8 of the Business Daily. Also, the digit today is 2.89 trillion shillings. Sector bids presented for the 2020-2021 financial year against a ceiling of 1.86 trillion shillings. The story continues on page 13 of the Business Daily. Tough questions for sectors on budget credibility. Budgeting has, in the last 2 financial years, become increasingly speculative, with bids in excess of 1 trillion shillings raising concerns about the integrity of the process. So the story continues on page 12 and 13. Budgeting has, in the last 2 financial years, become increasingly speculative, with bids in excess of 1 trillion shillings. And of course, they always say that this begins in all corruption begins in the budgeting process. Follow all the details on page 12 and 13 of the Business Daily today. Treasury seen struggling to get bank financing. Kenya risks liquidity problems due to the falling capacity of commercial banks to continue financing the large budget deficit, with the removal of the red cap also likely to raise borrowing costs for the Treasury. This story continues on page 19 of the Business Daily this morning. Let's continue and see what we have also on other dailies. We cross borders now to Uganda and not really Uganda, but Tanzania. I don't have the Daily Monitor in Uganda yet. This is the Citizen in Tanzania. 241 billion shillings boost for Ministry of Education, amount to help ease pressure of shortage of classrooms in schools and boost enrollment for both primary and secondary institutions. And you can see here, this is the Minister of Finance and Planning Permanent Secretary Doto James and Swedish Ambassador to Tanzania Anders Joberg signing a $90 million grant agreement from the Global Education Corporation Fund to finance the education sector, held in Dar es Salaam yesterday. And Russian government resignation leaves the world in shock. Russia's government resigned in a shock announcement on Wednesday after President Vladimir Putin proposed a shake-up of the constitution. The announcement by Putin's longtime ally Dmitry Medvedev came after the president used his annual State of the Nation address to call for a nationwide vote on a package of constitutional reforms. You can follow the rest of the details also inside the Citizen today. Businesses upbeat about TZ environment in 2020. That is another story in today's Citizen in Tanzania. Port bosses envisage full digital operations by 2021. Follow the story where you have a full package of it on page 3 of the Citizen in Tanzania. Still there, we have also Mwananchi for you. And this is what is on the front page of Mwananchi in Tanzania. This is the Swahili version of a Citizen. Shughuli pevu kitambulisho cha taifa. That is what it says. You can follow the story on page. This is page 2, or actually page 4 of the Mwananchi. Also, ugomvi mwingine wanukia sakata la umeya wa da. That is what we have there. Also, the story continues on page 5 of the Mwananchi. Let's cross over to Rwanda and see what the New Times has for us. How can the 40,000 job deficit be fixed? How can the 40,000 job deficit be fixed? This is how it is in Rwanda. And that is the figure. The government targets to create 200,000 off-farm jobs every year is yet to be achieved. The government's target to create 200,000 off-farm jobs every year is yet to be achieved, according to the Labour Force Survey Trends for quarter 3 of 2019 released by the National Institute of Statistics of Rwanda. There is an annual shortfall of an estimated 40,000 jobs. This is what it says. Kagame attends Nyusi's inauguration in Mozambique, and you can see him also holding court here with the President Paul Kagame is received by the Mozambican capital Maputo, by President Filipe Nyusi on Wednesday. And of course, you can read the rest of the details also inside the New Times. Kigali's central sewerage system finally takes shape. The story continues on page 2 of the New Times. And also, we have on top here, Rwanda author on finding her purpose through writing. This is all about women inside the New Times today. Let's move on and see what we have also on the front page of this week's The East African. Belts tightening as government kicks CSs and PSs out of parastatal boards. A circular from the heads of public service directs that the state officers should not be appointed to serve as independent members. We have the full report on page 5 of the East African. Also, law into trade haunting EAC in 2020. This is how it looks. Unless government takes drastic action to tackle trade barriers, economies will suffer, it says. And this is a story there by Lukanami. We need to do intertrade to also boost our own economies here. Law intertrade haunts the East Africa community in 2020. All right, let's see. Will this also make any discernible difference also with the new minister there? That is another question that we do have as well. You can grab a copy of the East African this week Let's see what we have also on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Of course, this is the latest, the time zone notwithstanding. And it says here, European powers raise pressure on Iran to abide by nuclear deal. And we have also a standalone picture here. Students at Tehran University on Tuesday held photos of victims killed when an Iranian missile downed Ukrainian airline. And here are the pictures. Also, big U.S. banks report strong results. The healthy U.S. economy pushed up profits at the country's biggest banks, allowing them to grow even though falling interest rates made lending less profitable. Consumer borrowing and a rebound in investment banking revenues propelled JP Morgan Chase and Company and Citigroup Inc. to double-digit earnings growth in the final 3 months of 2019. The rest of the details also inside the Wall Street Journal. We have also heart disease rose back. This is the story that you can also follow on page 10 of the Wall Street Journal. Let's move on to see what we have also on the front page of the magazines that we have recently. The Nairobi Business Monthly is focusing on the economy, Uhuru's fuzzy economics, and a stunning rosy economy that has left Kenya or Kenyans broke. That is what is turning the focus on this month. Also, company and industry, MultiChoice must innovate or perish. Money and markets, insurance companies' performance in 2019 also is a focus inside the Nairobi Business Monthly. And also, cost of building materials may dim affordable housing dream. This is skyrocketing and of course is affecting also the real estate as well. This is what we have on the front page of the Nairobi Business Monthly. You need also to grab a copy of the Nairobi Law Monthly, and this is how it looks. The Nairobi Law Monthly. Let me try and go there quickly. This is how it looks, and it's turning the focus on what is happening on the judiciary, the state of the judiciary. Jurisprudence, efficiency, fidelity to call of office, rule of law is what we do have there. So make sure also you grab a copy of the Nairobi Law Monthly. Also, on review, why Africa's future will determine the rest of the world's, and the naivety of buying and building in Kenya is the special reports here. So don't be naive, don't be none the wiser. Get all the details on page 25 of the Nairobi Law Monthly. And of course, also we have a guru in that sector who is the CEO and the founder of Debarl Group as well. He will tell us what is really happening in the real estate as far as the economy is concerned right now. Does it look all gloomy, or there is also hope this year? This is how it looks this month. I want to show you also internationally what we have on the front page of the Newsweek, the recent copy. If you've not grabbed your copy yet, this is what is trending its focus on after Elizabeth. And of course, we've been seeing what is happening in the royal family right now. So you can grab a copy. Family under control. It says here that what happens when the Queen can't keep her royal family under control. And this is in light of what happened, of course, with Prince Harry and Meghan as well, who she has relocated so far to Canada as it is right now. And they've taken themselves off special duties from the royal family. You can read all the details of the Crown here in the recent copy of the Newsweek. Also, let's see what is on the front page of the Time magazine. And this is what we have on the front page of the Time magazine. This is the latest copy. It should be available on January the 20th. The Iran standoff. The 40-year conflict. These are essays here by Elliot Ackman and David French and James Stavridis. What it means for the world. And this is what the Time magazine is focusing on. So make sure also you grab a copy for yourself as well. We also have the Entrepreneur for you. And this is what is on the front page of the Entrepreneur as well. This is the current copy. Start 2020 strong. Mark Wahlberg on how to become more focused and disciplined. Also, our 41st annual franchise 500 ranking also is inside the Entrepreneur. You can grab a copy of the Entrepreneur as well. I'll be remiss if I don't show you the editorial cartoons that we do have today before we buckle down to our discussion with the panelists who are already here in studio with me. And this is what we have inside the Standard today. Gentlemen, this is a perfect time. Kenyans are too busy with 2020 elections. And what is a perfect time for? Of course, we can see the posy of goons and how they're waiting to grab lands here while we're busy politicking. Maybe we have some unscrupulous people who are planning on how to actually grab public land here. And this is what now has been captured aptly here by Gado inside the Standard. Let's see what Stano has drawn for us. And this is what we have inside the People Daily today. And it's all about that particular security meeting that was in Mombasa and how Matiang'i has declared that Al-Shabaab shall be thwarted. In recent we've seen what they have been doing, especially in the northern frontier of this country, where we have some of the security agencies also who have been affected by the attacks by Al-Shabaab, even attacking masts here, communication masts here in the country. And this is what has been captured today by Stano inside the People Daily today. I'll show you what Victor has for us much later in the course of the program. I didn't quite get on time. But let's just buckle down to business. You're watching In the Market. And in his maiden assignment since being confirmed as the new cabinet secretary for the National Treasury, Ukuru Yatani has promised to right the economic wrong of his predecessors through a raft of expenditure cuttings measures, which he says will be brutal and sustained, with the country's public debt levels having crossed the 6 trillion shillings mark in 2019. The government's growing appetite for loans and how it procures them has also been a concern. In the current financial year, the National Treasury has already revised the revenue collection target from 1.81 trillion shillings to 1.7 trillion shillings, a figure it says is near realistic.
Outside the budget, when we do not have the ability to finance our own activities, is long gone. Gone are the days when on a ad hoc basis that we undertake projects without careful planning, particularly in terms of returns. And we strike a balance between short-term projects with immediate outcomes and avoid putting too much emphasis on large, long-term projects with delayed benefits. It's high time that we pay close attention on the debt and proportions positions, so that we have to move away from commercial debt to concessional, with a view of retiring those expensive ones and having only those ones we have to.
Hope you got what he said. I think we had some challenges there with the audio. But nonetheless, of course, you can grab a copy of the Business Daily, which is fully covering this particular story on the austerity measure there. State deepens austerity with 100 billion shillings budget cuts. The newly confirmed Treasury CS pushes ahead with his drive to reduce wasteful spending in state agencies as process of preparing next budget gathers pace. And I want to introduce our panelists who are already here with us today to just slice and dice the state of the economy. This morning with us, we shall be looking at an array of things from different sectors of the economy. Let's just begin from where we've just started with the CS of National Treasury, deepening austerity measures. Of course, we know even last year that close to £1 billion shillings was just spent on entertainment from the state agencies as well. But all these are pronouncements. Will they follow with discernible actions to make sure there will be a difference in what the CS has said? Allow me to introduce to you this morning Bill Okero, who is a businessman and former politician. So we do have with us as well the CEO and founder of Optivent Group. This is Sir George Washiuri. Also we do have with us as well Sanchen Gudka, who is the chair of Kenya Association of Manufacturers. And we have also Dr. Collins Odote, who is a regular panelist here, also a columnist with the Business Daily and a lecturer at the University of Nairobi. Right, so let's just begin from where the CS has left, and we have that particular headline in front of you. Do you think this will make any discernible difference as far as austerity measures is concerned? We've had these talks every year. So this beginning of year, we know the government will come and say we're coming down and issuing, of course, stern measures as far as Treasury is concerned. We've seen also from, let me just show you a bit from the East African, where we have this particular headline this week as well, that they're belt tightening, and they're saying government is kicking CSs and PSs out of parastatal boards. This is a circular from the head of public service directing the state officers should not be appointed to serve as independent members. This new development. Let's just begin with you, George. What do you think about this austerity measures being pronounced by government?
I think it's our prayer and hope that they are going to implement these measures, because there are some people who waste our taxes as public officers. And if they can be able to, to be able to be focused, I think we can be able to see extra money coming maybe to support what we are talking about, SMEs, smaller businesses. And we hope that the minister, the Honorable CS, is going to do something. So we are optimistic because he's a new man. Let's see how he's able to handle it. And we are hoping that he means what he says. Yes.
All right. So, good. This is not a new, of course, development we've had. Every year, the government really comes close, or it comes around with the same policy, with the same pronouncement. Would there be any difference? Your expectation?
Frankly, although the measures are welcome,
yes,
they'll make a small difference. I think the bigger challenge is to address the elephant in the room, which is how do we bring about efficiency and effectiveness in the recurrent expenditure. Because the recurrent expenditure is just blown out of all proportion. And it is dampening development expenditure. The country has got very little left now to spend on development expenditure. So although these small austerity measures on traveling, etc., and other discretionary expenditure within the ministries is welcome, I think the bigger impact will be felt by addressing the size of government and the reduction in recurrent expenditure.
So the size of government and the current reduction in the expenditure. Let's just hear from Collins Odote.
Morning, Debarl.
Morning.
I think CS Yatani, the last few months that has been in Treasury, seems that he's genuine, at least from his initial efforts. You see somebody who speaks simply, firmly, and consistently. I think that is reassuring. Reassuring, especially in an economy that is in deep trouble. The austerity measures, as the previous panelists have said, are welcome, but little. I think recurrent expenditure is a huge issue, but there's even a bigger elephant in the room, which is the debt burden. I think we've spoken about that on this forum for too long.
Yes, yes.
We are in a debt crisis, and part of this is because we are simply close to being unable to live within our means. We are choking under debt. So I think sustaining the austerity measures, I think, is not an option. I think it's something he must do. If you were here towards the end of last year, for the first time you even saw parastatals being asked to pay dividends in advance. It wasn't out of good measure. It is that we're looking for any way to continue staying afloat. So I think we will require to be much more innovative than just the austerity measures. There are things we'll have to do. For example, if you listen to some conversations towards the end of last year, something we've discussed here about the SGR.
Yes.
And its implications on the economy. Something that I think has not been spoken about honestly. And if we start with the honesty we've seen in the, from CS Yatani about austerity measures, he needs to extend that honesty to other things, including debt, so that we can be able to know this is actually where we are, and we can be able to cut our costs according to our size. But the initial measures, I think, are reassuring from him.
Right, let's hear from Bill Okero. Good morning.
Yeah, morning.
Good morning.
I think if there is one thing that I have understood from the CS Treasury in the last 24 hours is recognition that the economy is in bad shape. I think for a long time the government has argued that, particularly Treasury, that the economy is growing very well, 6.3%, everything is good, and that, you know, what's wrong with Kenyans? Why are you complaining?
No.
But I think he seems to appreciate that there's a serious problem. But I think I haven't been in Parliament for a very long time. My understanding is that CS Treasury does not really have the ultimate power to determine what happens in government in terms of spending. I think the decision is always at the top, and it needs that political will from the presidency to go through with those proposals. If that political will is not available, whatever the Treasury says will be undermined by the cabinet in the long run. And this happens always when you look at the way our projects are planned. You know, we still have decisions that are made which are not probably in the budget, and quite often these things get pushed to Treasury to implement. So this misplaced priorities, which and the wastefulness, which is really because of that lack of political will to commit itself to these austerity measures and so forth. I don't know how he's going to address that, but that is going to be the key thing. If he has the political will, the support up there, that there's the will, and he has the, you know, to go ahead and do what he thinks is right, then I think we'll see change. But otherwise, I think, as the English would say, the proof of the eating, the proof of the pudding is in the eating.
Is in the eating. But of course, you don't think when we have him being confirmed, that is the CS Ukura as the CS right now, that is a good political gesture and a good political will from the presidency?
I think so, yes. It's a good will. It shows in the last, what has been happening in the last couple of days, of course, gives a good indication that there's a will. So we'll see whether we'll go through with it. But I think that indication is there.
Okay. Yes, Sanche?
I think we're getting to the stage of confronting reality at the moment.
Yeah.
And that acknowledgement, as Mr. Kero has said, is important, because we were in cloud cuckoo land earlier in terms of, as you said, the economy is growing nicely, so why are there no shillings in Wanjiku's pocket? So the issue is that the wastefulness and our lack of controls on procurement in government and getting the right value for money for the products and services that are procured is something that really needs to be firmed up as well. So whilst these budget cuts, these austerity measures on travel and so on are important, the biggest return will be on better procurement in government and making sure that there is delivery on projects and value for money for projects. Yeah.
So when you talk about maybe prioritization in the government, especially we've been seeing some of the projects being flagged here, we do not have any streamlined, any thoughtful consideration through these particular projects. As if you read the Business Daily today, it really showcases this as well. Could you talk about prioritization in the government, the wastefulness that you're really talking about? Because we have a tidy good sum of 800 million shillings just being spent on entertainment in 3 good months, according to the reports that we had in the last quarter of last year. Where are we headed with this? Let's hear from you.
I think even before we talk about the prioritization, I think it's important for the CS to look at the well-being of SMEs that have been supplying county government with goods and services, the SMEs that have been supplying national government with the services. And some of these companies are really ailing because the government is not paying, the county is not paying. And I think that's also a very big issue that needs to be looked at. And of course, we have seen the budget for 2019-2020. They are allocating a huge amount to infrastructure, which for us, for real estate, I think when the infrastructure develops, we say that we open our eyes, especially for real estate. But of course, as my colleagues have said, I think we have seen projects that don't add value to Wanjiku, to the common Kenyan. And also, as the professor is saying, the level of debt that Kenyans don't know what that money did is a real concern for the common mwananchi, people who are in business like us. And I think the CS has got a duty, the government has a duty to convince Kenyans that the same rate they are really coming to spy on us in our organization to collect this money, we want the same monitoring of this money, that this money is going to the right projects. Yes.
All right. Collins Odote?
Debarl, Bill was in Parliament.
Yes.
and very instrumental in the budget making process. I increasingly ask myself, so what is the role of MPs in the budget making process? And how useful is this budget as a tool for development? I say so for two reasons. Because we need to increasingly start interrogating, what do we actually budget our money for, on the one instance? Then secondly, what do we use it for? Because if you see the report, you're talking about 800 million spent on entertainment, we need to start asking ourselves, is that what we budgeted for to spend the last 3 months? Because if we did, we are in serious trouble. But the second, if you look, for example, at the president's speech, there are many places where he put money, which is a good thing. But you then ask yourself, was this money that were budgeted for, or are this money that is plugging out needs that were not budgeted for? I think for me that's because otherwise we will have a situation where we spend a lot of time with the members of parliament in parliament, but what they do does not really translate to the real problem. Because if that doesn't happen, then the tool of controls disappear. Because even in your house, you can have a very rosy picture of your budget, knowing that the reality is different. Then you start doing things that does not add up. And that misses the complete fundamental issue. So that when we even talk about austerity measures, you will write a memo saying this should not happen, but how many people then sneak in strange things? And that's where the problem, because if we must sustain the reality, because if we admit, as CS has done, that we are in trouble, being in trouble requires you to do unusual things. And I think part of those unusual things must be to make it impossible for people to spend like 800 million, not just to say don't do it, but to make it practically impossible to do so. And that's what we discuss.
Right, and this is the bit really spending that you're talking about, that yes, where is the 800 million shillings really coming from? Are they really following the budget? And being particular intent on the itemized budget that was in the financial year?
No, I think we all know that governments all over the world have a planning unit. Even in this country, we had a planning ministry. And Treasury used to be called Ministry of Planning and Finance, because before you do any estimates, you have to plan really what you want to do for the medium term and for the long term. And this is why we have different development blueprints, the 20 Vision 2030 and so forth. The challenge we have had in this country in recent years is the lack of commitment to those development blueprints. That we wake up today and say we want to have, this project is important, so laptops are important, and we must spend this billion. We want to go to Kulalu, we want to spend, have 1 million acres. You just, and that is where we, but I think to answer his question, whatever the budgeting is, the Auditor General does actually flag out that disconnect between the actual expenditure and what is budgeted. It's when you read the budget, the auditors report every year. It's every Kenyan has seen it, and it's terrible. That 800 million, the auditor will have flagged it, or does flag it actually every day, from the top ministry to every institution in government. There's no commitment.
But there's no consequence management.
That has been the issue.
General's report.
That has been the issue of action on the Auditor General's report.
Yes.
But I think in the last, if you have seen the last 6-7 years, really, the executive has not been very kind towards the report from the Auditor General. And in fact, the auditor has been belittled or undermined, even in public, and chided many times for, how do you say the government cannot account for this? And we've reached a point where government ministries or departments nowadays do not even provide information to the auditor. So the auditor keeps flagging out, he didn't get supporting documents or information regarding all those expenditures. But I think the issue for me really is what we have seen in the last few years in terms of development. The reason why we talk about this misplaced priorities, that many of the projects that we have seen are contractor driven in the last few years, whether it's in the water sector, those dams, all those big projects. We know, we read it every day, that some of these things have been contractor driven. It went back to what we said no to, those days of Anglo-Liston, that there's no way we can allow a contractor getting the finance and doing the design and doing the job, and that's where you have this inflated, and this is what we went back to in the last few years. So I think government needs to live within its means. You can't really say because there is free money available to borrow, we must borrow anytime we want. And I think that for me, the parliament, unfortunately, is not parliament of those days. Parliament now in the last 7 years have been, to a large extent, been subdued by the executive. It's clear.
It's a rubber stamp parliament as it is right now.
More or less, yes. So I don't think we've had that oversight that challenge to the expenditure in terms of the executive. And I think that unfortunately this happens after the law, the constitution gave all the powers to parliament to actually play a significant role in budget making.
Yes.
Significant role. They're the ones who can determine what goes where. But in a situation where parliament is, significantly influenced by the executive, then that oversight role has been. But the other institutions seem to be coming out. The Auditor General and other watchdog institutions, I think the DPP's office and others that seem to be coming out more stronger in terms of trying to follow up and deal with some of these issues.
All right, Collins.
Bill's statement just reminded me that we actually don't even have an Auditor General.
Yes, that was the next point that we're coming up to. We don't have an Auditor General as it is right now. Many of the state corporations have not also submitted the financial reports as it is right now.
And then we also have an office that we rarely speak about, which is the Controller of Budget.
Yes, and
whose responsibility is actually to help the country in the process of monitoring expenditure, to ensure that yet we are still complaining. I think Bill has actually hit the nail on the head. If you look at Parliament, the powers that we've given Parliament in this constitution is disproportionate to what they do. The current Parliament, I think, is almost worse than before the Aringo Bill that eventually led to greater autonomy for Parliament. While we can blame the executive for making it a rubber, I think we also need to start asking ourselves, even with the little room that you find a parliament that is more eager to be the executive than the executive itself. What someone will say that the house nigger, that the house is burning and saying we burning, so you are more than the oppressor. I think that's the bigger tragedy. Like if you look at how they behave, watch a chair of a committee speaking, and the chair of a committee thinks that the mark of his or her success is if he appears to be the CS in the relevant ministry. As opposed to being a watchdog, they actually want to be responsible for implementation. And we need to start asking ourselves why. Because as long as they continue abdicating their responsibility, the country will be in trouble. So we either make two choices, and that's part of the conversation thing. Unfortunately, in the draft that eventually came from BBI, one of the things that was never dealt with was A, the role of Parliament, and B, the relationship between the National Assembly and the Senate. Because either we improve their performance or we take some of their powers to somebody else. Because it doesn't make sense to give people constitutional powers that does not translate to constitutional responsibility.
Do you want to say something before we wind up on this and then we'll gravitate to other discussions as well?
I think the government has to make a choice. I will always say that this country, we are here to stay. And if you see some of the things that they do within the expenditure of the money they collect from us in private sector, and we participate, even guiding them in Kenya Private Sector Alliance, but you don't see the action within the way government works. But they will say they'll do it, but they don't do it. So don't be surprised, these austerity measures we're talking about, to realize that instead of spending 800 million on entertainment, they will triple, because they say one thing, they do something else. And by the way, government has got very good structure if they can follow those structures. But how the money disappears from government, that's another discussion.
Right. Sachin, finally.
I think really two recommendations. Hire an Auditor General immediately. Secondly, implement the recommendations and the findings in the last Auditor General's report. And if there is real sincerity in wishing to change, I believe it's the action on the ground in terms of implementation of the recommendations of the Auditor General's report last year, and that will send a strong signal to the public that there is action being taken on waste.
All right, and of course we want to see also how the Nairobi Security Exchange is faring so far, because we know that is where we get to have the bellwether of the state of economy as it is. And the prognosis from the Nairobi Security Exchange is not exactly good. According to figures from their books, more than 15 companies have issued profit warnings over the past 1 year, a sign of something seriously wrong. For one or two companies, it can be management issues, but when more than a dozen companies find themselves shedding revenues, eye begins to turn to microeconomic details, political uncertainty, poor credit uptake and erratic weather conditions featured as main reasons companies listed at the Nairobi Security Exchange issued profit warnings. When companies are doing good business, they shy away from taking up loans for fear of having problems servicing them. While official statistics showed conditions eased in 2018, the number of firms that issued profit warnings expecting profits to decline by at least 25% kept increasing into 2019. And of course, if this particular trend doesn't change, we can't expect more profit warnings from NSE going also through this year. Companies that issued profit warnings in 2018, we have many of them: Flemtrip Group, also Standard Chartered Bank, Family Bank. We had also BOC, Mumias Sugar, Kenya Revenue Insurance, Cap Chorua Tea, Housing Finance Group, Kenya Power, Sanlam, National Bank of Kenya, UAP Holdings, East African, Portland. Also we have Kenya Reinsurance, Cabacid, Samia Africa, and Crown Paints. Also to mention UAP, Old Mutual, and EGADS. With profit warnings, we know comes layoffs, and many corporates have indeed cut their payrolls. Kenya public debt has increased threefold over the last 6 years, from 1.8 trillion shillings to 6 trillion shillings. Even then, the government plans to spend 2.6 trillion shillings in this financial year, and of course finance through domestic revenue to the tune of 1.88 trillion shillings. We want to also look at this. When we have such dire, of course, outcomes from Nairobi Security Exchange, so what does it really tell about the state of economy, Bilokero?
Well, I think I'll speak from my own. I'm a businessman. I do some exports. I'm also a member of CAM. We do manufacturing. But I can tell you that there are what I think I know for a fact.
Yes.
For the last many years, even as a very senior member of the Institute of Certified Public Accounting, for many years, what I know is that the government is properly advised by the private sector every year.
Yes.
The needs of the private sector, the needs of the manufacturing sector, they are well advised, because this sector has always put in their request to the government in order to improve the business environment.
Yes.
If the business environment is addressed, no one wants any other incentive from government. I think it's not like the businessman asking for, can we get this money, or can you increase our price of food to this or to this thing. What people want is that environment which is conducive and which will enhance competitiveness. One of the challenges we are having is our competitiveness in the region. And this is why you see many of these businesses are unable to trade or to export or to do their business. And the reason is because of the high costs. And part of this, high costs is attributed always to government, whether it's taxes, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's labor-related issues, and so forth. So I think what you see on Nairobi Stock Exchange is really nothing compared to what's happening to the SMEs and to the informal sector, which really accounts for 80% of our economy. The situation in those areas is worse. People are unable to do the little things that they've been doing. And so I think it's important that the government goes through with many of every sector in this country. There are very well done policies, really, that have been done. For example, SME has very, policies that have been developed, and we know what is required in order to lift that sector out. But going through with it has always been the challenge. But I think I agree what the observations that have been given regarding NSE. I think there are serious challenges in the economy, and I'm sure the situation is not likely to get better this year, especially with the political temperatures also going up. I don't see how the situation would be better, but I think the government needs to really be alive to that fact, because there's no way you can expect revenue. Your cash cow is the economy. That's where your money is coming from. If the economy is in ICU, then you can't get money, and you cannot keep on borrowing. So I had the minister say we don't want to borrow anymore. We want to live within our means. But I think to do that, and for KRA to raise revenue, they need to address many of the challenges. And some of them are really policies that are stupid. You don't understand why the government would, for example, when you're committed to manufacturing, as your big four, and then you wake up in the morning and say, I'm raising the IDF fees and so forth, you know, from 2% to 5.5%.
Yes.
You're just making things more expensive and expensive every day, and making life more difficult.
There's a correction. The IDF fees for authorized manufacturers and RDL will be at a lower rate compared to importation of finished product. So manufacturers are authorized to bring in inputs at lower IDF fees than for finished goods. So it's at 1.5%. You need to be an authorized manufacturer. The list goes to Ministry of Industry and Treasury.
Authorized manufacturers for raw materials.
No, inputs basically.
Inputs,
but
yes.
not finished goods.
Inputs, not finished goods.
Yeah.
But it's still, that you have to apply to KRA to get a waiver. Otherwise, you're subject to that new higher
Correct,
rate.
but there is a process and
very time consuming and really.
Well, the process itself is very bureaucratic.
Again, I agree with Mr. Kero there that the government, there's a disconnect between the policy directives from the top and implementation on the ground. It's disjointed and needs complete strengthening and revamping. So for example, if the president says, and the spirit of the law is authorized manufacturers should have IDF and RDL at 1.5%, the process of implementation of that is like pulling teeth, because all sorts of procedures come in which make it so difficult to actually implement the spirit of the new law. So there are some measures that are coming in which are well-meaning. However, the technocrats and the bureaucrats are actually making life more difficult in terms of making it easy to do business for people. And this is a serious challenge. I think the overall state of the economy, you mentioned about profit warnings and things, the pain is felt across the ground. I agree with Mr. Kero. There are three, I would say, overarching issues at the moment. The first one is competitiveness. If this country does not do a deep dive on our competitiveness as a nation, we are doomed to fail. And that deep dive needs to happen on your inbound competitiveness, your process competitiveness, and your outbound competitiveness. The second area is addressing the liquidity and affordability challenge, because liquidity is a huge issue in the economy at the moment. There's just no cash in circulation. I think we saw a figure yesterday of 177 billion shillings being the lowest amount of cash in the private sector. So where is all the liquidity sitting? It's probably sitting at the banks because they're afraid to lend to private sector. Consumers are afraid to spend. There's low liquidity or unable to spend. So how do we unlock the liquidity riddle? Because also are the banks only lending to government, which is then crowding out private sector borrowing. So there are lots of challenges amongst liquidity and affordability that need to be coming in. And the third major thing, an impediment, which a lot of people are spending too much time over on non-value adding activities, is regulatory overreach. I think we've become a slave to the regulators rather than the private sector becoming the engine of the economy. And I think the regulators are should be acting as enablers, not as inhibitors to the economy.
Right. Well, we're going to take a short break right now. When we circle back, of course, we shall be looking keenly on that. Do we have money in the economy? You talk of course, from your column that I read yesterday of money velocity, right? So how is the velocity of the money in the economy? Is it very sluggish as it is right now? And how can we actually try and pry ourselves from this sluggishness of the economy that we have right there? But we shall be also looking at the Finance Act, which introduced the turnover tax for SMEs as well, whose annual sales are below 5 million shillings. This we know Treasury had in 2018 dropped that particular turnover tax, but now there is a resumption of it. Does it just continue to saddle Kenyans with more taxes, and how will this fare? Many are also for it, and others are against it, saying it will really adversely affect the small traders as it is right now. But of course, we continue also to hear from you as well. Make sure you hit us on Twitter, AM Live NTV's Twitter handle. Also, AM Live NTV, our profile name on Facebook, and 20686, our SMS. Our portal will take a station break right now. When we circle back, we continue with more. Don't go away.
Eldoret Technical Training Institute. Registration for January, May and September 2020 intakes is ongoing. Apply now. Eldoret Technical Training Institute. Growing reputation.
Look at this. And this. So this. Why is this so? The culture of good driving and road safety starts with attending the right driving school and receiving the right driving instructions. Now you know. AA Kenya.
Register today for your driving classes. Dial *650#.
For 100 years now, AA has walked with you throughout the journey. Automobile Association of Kenya. You never drive alone.
Kupika kila mtu ajipikie yake. Na vyombo za nani? Kwa nani?
Am I not getting some?
Ice cream ya wageni. Wewe nitakuletea maji kwa jikoni.
A girl's gotta eat to keep up with you, Mr. Guns.
Well, that's absolutely correct.
This festive season, get a decoder with subscription at an unbelievable festive offer of only 1,499 shillings. You can also pay 1 month and enjoy 2 weeks free on a higher bouquet. For more information, call 0719 077 077.
Star Times. Enjoy digital life.
Every day, NTV News Team moves you to the center of the action.
The security forces who took part in this operation.
Police are not taking anything to chance it.
Moves you to the heart of the story to witness and record history.
Rendering the declared results null and void.
Telling the story of Kenya.
The growing importance of border in Mandera.
Matatus will be on strike.
And beyond.
The politics in the United States capital.
It is the 7th edition of the Global Education taking place in Dubai.
When it comes to business, we crunch the numbers and unpack the detail with the latest information for your investment decision.
It's time to say goodbye to this note and karibu to this note.
In order for the manufacturing sector to be elevated from the ground.
Despite the government's promise to create at least 1.3 million jobs.
Moves you fast past the planes and trucks to bring you the triumphs and joys of our great men and women.
Moving stories that touch our hearts.
I didn't know that I could go back to school.
The Back to School program has brought hope to these young mothers.
NTV News. News that moves you.
Yoga is an everyday practice. If you're looking to transform your physical life and get into a healthy mental state, do it every day.
What's the value of breathing in and out? Because I hear a lot of that with the yoga.
In every movement you do in yoga, there is a breath. Every pose goes with a breath. The more we breathe in the practice of yoga, we avoid so many injuries.
With Lipa na M-Pesa, you get more.
Lipa na M-Pesa.
Every 100 shillings spent on Lipa na M-Pesa earns you an entry into the draw. Do more with Lipa na M-Pesa.
Ilizae kama hajalema.
Serikali leta dawa gani?
It's almost a year, nothing has been done.
I just need some form of information.
Dr. Mugo Wairimu first hit the headlines when a video clip showing him raping an unconscious female patient in his clinic.
With
the puzzle surrounding the sugar saga yet to be cleared.
How many times were you sexually abused?
Like 3 times.
How was a convicted child molester allowed to set up a children's home in the country?
NTV News. Bold, balance, authoritative.
Welcome back. You're watching In the Market here on AM Live. We continue with the conversation at pace on the state of economy, and we're trying to see also currently how the Nairobi Security Exchange is faring on, which is a harbinger or a bellwether, so to speak, of what is really happening as far as the economy is concerned. 15 companies have so far listed profit warnings as it is, and we're eagerly waiting to see how this will also pan out this year as well. So what does this really tell about the state of the economy? And I'm holding court this morning with Sanchen Gudkar, who is the chair of the Kenya Association of Manufacturers. Also, we have the founder and CEO of the Optivent Group. This is George Washuri. We are also holding court this morning with Bill Okero, who is a former senator and also a businessman. And we have also Dr. Collins Odote, who is a lecturer at the University of Nairobi and also a columnist with the Business Daily. So before we took a short break, yes, I don't know, we were still with you, Sachin, right? So maybe just to take the conversation and drill it deeper a bit, looking at NSE and from the front of also the real estate that we will be discussing much later robustly. Collins Odoto, you can just give us your headline thoughts.
Debarl, you know, you asked us a question about the NSE, about the reductions, and I wanted to reflect back to 2003 to 2007.
Yes.
During the period of the first term of President Kibaki. And as they were implementing the economic recovery strategy, you remember 2 things about the NSE. You remember, 1, new Kenyans starting to buy shares for the first time. You remember almost every Kenyan getting excited about getting dividends. Those are the 2 things you remember. I don't know the last time anybody on this table, 1, got dividends, or 2, was excited about getting dividends.
We got from Safari.
Even when you get it
from Safaricom,
the amount of excitement is not there because it is too little and too far between. That's an indicator of an economy that is depressed. I think Bill is the one who was saying that, you know, the economy is the cash cow. And I think how you treat your cow is extremely important. An economy that is depressed as it is with what we see from the NSE, with the closures of companies, with the layoffs of staff, I think it's an indicator of a bigger problem. And that bigger problem requires serious action. Unfortunately, the actions that we see is about trying to get more cows and not treating the cow. So you have a cow that is depressed, a cow that is malnourished, and you're trying to look for how do we get more cows. And what does that mean? Increased taxation. Let's try and have turnover tax. Let's try and have this tax. That's what you're focusing on. Instead of focusing on the 2 fundamental things. Number 1 is how do we fatten the cow? That means what kind of incentives are you putting into the economy? I think that's the first. Number 2 is what do we do with them? What are we doing with the milk? And that's about expenditure. I don't see enough work being focused on what we are doing with the milk. Instead, we're just focusing on more taxation. And if somebody is already on his knees, a lot of businesses, however much you continue taxing them, they won't be able to pay you more. And I think that's the one thing that we need to start asking ourselves. How do we make the environment much more conducive for people to be able to produce more? And I don't think there's sufficient conversations taking place on doing that. Even if you watch the president's speech, except for the stimulus packages that he gave to a few places, you don't see the conversations required in terms of what is the environment for manufacturing. What are we doing with the cost of power?
I think the...
And let's say from George, then we come to you, Sachin. Yeah, we'll come to you, Sachin.
I think on NSE, of course, we are not there ourselves. We have seen older companies having a lot of challenges. And the challenge I take to entrepreneurs is to ask themselves, are we doing business the same way we did many years ago, or things have changed? I would say things have changed. And I do mentorship to small business people and the young people. And I have seen a lot of changes in technology. The way business is done, now business has moved from the traditional way of doing it to digital platforms. And other than the ones that we have seen that are either retrenching, either firing people, we have seen young companies coming up, hiring people. A good example is Optiven. This year we hired 30. Last year we hired 120 permanent employees, because our model is slightly different, and there are many companies out there that are coming up. And that's why I urge the government to identify those companies coming up with new technologies, new way of thinking, new innovation, so that the jobs that we are losing from the older companies, they can be replaced by the upcoming companies, and they only need some nurturing. You know, there's one proposal I always put on my blogs, that the government can be able to nurture these tech companies, whereby they say, if you register a company today, you are given 3 years tax holiday, so that you are able to come up and hire more people. But with conditions that if you get this tax holiday for 3 years, you must employ maybe 10 people. So these 10 people, remember, you are paying pay as you earn. Yes. And Debarl, you know that KRA get almost half of the money from payroll. So let's not all die because older companies are having challenges. There are other emerging companies that are coming up, and I'm sure most of them are watching us. And I would like to encourage those young entrepreneurs coming up, you know, take full charge, keep up the growth. Don't fear registering with the government, because at the end of the day, we have to pay taxes so that we are able to support our government. But of course, as we support them, they also take care of the milk, as the professor is saying. So it is not all gloom that a few companies are filing. There are others that we know of that they are also hiring. But the thing is that we saw government declaring that they don't have records of these companies. In fact, the estimate says we have about 5.6 million companies informal, not registered, but they are making money. And I'm happy that the strategy the government is using to pick that money is the wrong strategy. And I think the solution is with us, the private sector. We can be able to give them solutions on how to harness these upcoming companies. One of the ways is to massage them, is to persuade them, is to give them you know, some benefits, so that they are bold enough to come and say, I'm doing business online, but now I'm ready to go to a Sharia house, register, and pay this presumptive tax. So that's the way to go.
Right. Let's hear from Bill Okero. We'll come to you, Sechan.
I don't really support the view that overall, I think we need to look at the situation in overall terms. Yeah, if we look at certain sectors, yes, of course, there are sectors that always grow. Like in the tech industry, this is an area that is always growing in any country. But I think overall the situation is not really that rosy. If you look at NSCA, because I have a business that is engaged with the stock exchange, let me tell you, in the last few years, we've only had companies delisting. The last time we had an IPO, you know, a new company coming on board.
Yes.
It's many years ago.
So for the last decade, this is a new decade.
Yeah.
We've not had any listed company within the NSE as it is right now.
Yes, if there was growth, even if these tech companies were growing, we would be seeing companies listing on the stock exchange. But what we have seen is many prominent companies that have been delisting, and they've either gone under, or they have one reason or the other, and you know, and now with many of them also showing these problems of profitability.
Yeah,
you'll find again probably in the next couple of years some companies delisting or something. So I think it does clearly show that the economy, and that is really in any country, that is the heartbeat. You look at the stock exchange and say, yes, at least something is happening. But if that is not happening, then it means we have a challenge. Down there is even worse. And the fact that it's worse is the realization by the president this week. That you know, the fact that situation is worse down there is what he realized this week when he started addressing the issues of coffee, tea, and you know, the farmers, because that
and
is
the money in the pocket.
Yes, and that is where the country is. I mean, the 47 million Kenyans, 80% of them are down there. Yeah. They are dealing with the coffee, the tea, the farmers, the milk. Those are the people, and they're suffering. There's no money. And I think he said clearly, I want to see money in the pockets. Yes. We'll wait to see money. When they get money in the pocket, then all of us will see something happening in the stock exchange. Because those are the same companies that provide services, that provide goods. They're the companies manufacturing. They're the companies who are, you know. So I think the economy is interlinked in many ways. So, but that does not change the fact that there are fundamental issues that the government needs to address overall in order to, and one of them being mentioned earlier, the issue of debt, because of the crowding of the finance and so forth. But the issue of debt is the single most important that drives all this appetite for tax. You know, all this appetite for more spending by government, this, lack of rationalization in the and wastefulness. It's all because of trying to to get into this excitement of debt and borrow and spend. And I think this is something that would really change our lives if as the minister says, they cut down on borrowing. It really changes. And we cut down, and he said very clearly, we want to cut down our clothes, our size. If they do that.
But is that pronouncement by the minister as well just a head fake? Because we know they're saying we are cutting down on borrowing, yet the government has raised the debt ceiling at the same time.
No, we are going to see. That's why we said everything they proposed is subject to the implementation. I mean, that's what we started off with. We have to wait and see whether they're going to go through it. But that intention has been made, that they have realized that debt is a problem. A few months ago, that was not the picture. The government, especially the president, has been saying, what debt are you talking about? We're healthy. And we'll continue borrowing. Now the situation is, no, it's not healthy. We're not going to borrow. So I think even the mindset is changing. So hopefully, we will see what happens in reality.
We'll come to, let's get to Sachin before he loses train of thought.
I think the SGR repayments come due now,
yes,
which is going to add a further burden on a struggling economy. The important thing to recognize here is, are we going to keep on taxing the same people and milking them more and more, or are we going to widen the tax net? I disagree with you that yes, let's bring everyone in through this presumptive tax and so on. There are two scenarios to this. You have a kiosk owner who is selling fast-moving consumer goods at maybe a margin of 7% on the product. KRA wants to tax weird. On the other hand, we've got a massive informal and a gig economy, such as we know of hairdressers who earn 300 to 400,000 shillings a month, but they don't pay a cent in tax. So we have massive distortions and a massive tax base that is that needs widening. The issue is, how are we going to have a surgical effect on this rather than the sledgehammer of a 3% turnover tax, because that may be punitive and may actually drive a lot more small businesses to the ground, actually.
All right.
Yeah. Actually, I did not say that presumptive tax, I support it. I don't support it. But my advocacy is government to support informal sector, the SMEs, the MSME, and to take back the NSE discussion. I think it's important for Kenyans to know that I have been attending the Ibuka program, whereby the upcoming businesses are being prepared to join NSE. So if you're out there doing a business and you want to join NSE through Ibuka program, you are taught, you are trained on how to list on NSE. I think we should not shy away joining NSE, because that's the way to go. And I must say that for entrepreneurs out there, I say once again, if you don't change the way you do business, definitely we'll be complaining economy. And someone told me that when there are challenges, there are opportunities. Because sometimes I wonder, we have foreign companies coming to Kenya. In fact, in real estate, say, we are going to do business for the next 100 years. And we ask ourselves, how comes we Kenyan, we are complaining that there's no money in the pocket, there's no business. Is it the way we do business, or is it the way we need to change? Look at people like Uber, they came to Kenya. You see the figures they are posting. Look at Glovo, this company for food deliveries. Yet we have people who have got brains to do apps to deliver food. So money is actually being wired out of the country, yet we have the potential. I think we need to nurture the young people to tell them that there is still hope, because young people who are listening to us out there, they may say, wait a minute, I don't want to touch NSE. So even as we discuss the way economy is not doing so well, we need to inspire, to encourage the upcoming business people, the upcoming entrepreneurs. And that's the role of private sector ourselves. It's also the role of government. That's why for me, I advocate that we must have ways of mentoring, inspiring young people. I attended this presidential debate at Strasbourg, and we were all excited. In fact, we thought Gikoba is going to be like Dragon Mall in Dubai, whereby these people can be arranged in an organized manner. The infrastructure is good, but the discussion was, reached where the president released his speech. Nobody even went to Gikoba to see how these thousands of business people can be supported. So if we go that way, we can be able to uplift the business people. But let people have hope, because at the end of the day, we have to really do business in this particular country.
Thank you. Let's hear from Collins Oduote, then we'll sum it up. We'll go to now that particular tax that we're talking about, the turnover tax, and just discuss it robustly. We can write, yes.
It's nice to sell hope, as George is trying to do, but that hope must be based on some reality. And I think the Gikomba example is the exact one. When I listened to George initially, he was saying, you know, even though some of the big companies are delisting, there are smaller ones coming up. And I think for me, that's where the fallacy starts.
Yes.
It should not be that one dies for the other to come up.
We'll also die ourselves.
That's not good.
Every company dies, by the way. Even the companies in the US that were there 100 years ago, they are not there.
But the question is
true.
Yes.
Talk of the products.
The bigger question is why are they dying?
But not in a robust way.
The question why they're dying is, I think, what is concerning us. Because when you look at NSE, if you look at the numbers of companies that are listing, if you look at jobs that are being complained that are losing, that's where the challenge is. If we were saying that company X has died, but Y has come up, and in terms of employment, there is a zero sum, then you're saying the economy is not growing, it's stagnant. If we are employing more than we are losing, the economy is growing. The challenge is that, yes, there are few people being employed, but the amount of people losing their jobs are more than those that are getting. That's what worries me. The second thing, Debarl, you asked the question about will Yatani do what he's saying in terms of the debt? Will he not borrow? I think we need to be sympathetic with Yatani. He is in a problem anyway. It's a deep hole. So trying to balance between I am not borrowing, at the same time I need to borrow a little to do this, I think for me that's not the bigger problem. The bigger problem is going to be how he ensures that the ship is steadied. In that process, there are some things he will do in the short term that he shouldn't do, but they will be necessary for us to be able to stabilize things. And I think what he does over the next, for me the most important thing is going to be the final budget that we see this year. The final one, the one that's approved. The next thing that's going to be is the report of the Controller and Auditor General for this year, because then we will know how much traction are we having in some of the proposals that are coming up.
Sachin, you heard?
I was just saying, flotation through the Nairobi Stock Exchange is not the only option available for entrepreneurs to cash in and exit. We've seen the advent of private equity come in. A lot of businesses have gone for private equity, and through private equity, after expansion and so on, they've been sold to multinationals and so on. So we've seen a different avenue open up apart from floating on the stock exchange. And I would say partly that's why we've not seen a recent flotation. But secondly, when investor sentiment is subdued, there's no incentive to actually go to the stock market and float your company. So realistically, I think there are other avenues open for exiting your business and apart from floating on the stock exchange.
Right. Thank you. Right. Let's just gravitate this discussion now to what we earlier said, that we shall be looking at the small traders sales tax. And we know that traders operating small and medium-sized businesses started this January paying a 3% tax on their sales to the Kenya Revenue Authority following the reintroduction of the levy, which looks set to hurt enterprises struggling with low revenues. The Finance Act 2019, which President Uhuru Kenyatta signed into law on November the 5th, reintroduced the turnover tax for businesses whose annual sales are below 5 million shillings to boost tax collections. The new tax takes effect, of course, I said earlier, it took effect from January the 1st and will saddle small traders who have raised concerns about deteriorating businesses' conditions with additional operating costs. Now remember, the Treasury had in 2018 dropped the turnover tax due to its poor performance, as most traders failed to make revenue disclosures. And this is some of the measures the government is actually trying to do to raise revenue now that it has a target of 1.7 billion shillings, trillion shillings, I should say, and they've revised that from the ambitious 1.8 trillion shillings as it is. But is this the way to go? Maybe also I should just pick up a copy of the Business Daily that we had yesterday, and you can see also KRA will be sending spies into some of its companies that are not really submitting their statutory, remittances as well. I'll show you much later in the course of the program as we're discussing. But let's just discuss this. We know the Finance Act 2019 reintroduced the turnover tax for SMEs whose annual sales are below 5 million, which is now what is really happening. It had dropped this. Do you think this is a likely way to go? If it failed before, what do they think about it working now?
I think the definition of insanity is to keep on doing the same thing and expecting a different result, according to Albert Einstein. So realistically, you mentioned the target is 1.7 trillion.
Yes.
In reality, KRA collected 1.45 trillion last year.
1.45?
Yeah. So that means that's a 20% increase this year to get to 1.7 trillion. Where is that 20% going to come from in what we call a fiscally constrained economy? So how are you going to raise tax collections in a fiscally constrained economy? And I think the issue there is you need, as I mentioned earlier, either you put in this sledgehammer of 3% turnover tax, which may penalize businesses operating on thin margins, like the kiosks, or you be smarter about it and broaden the tax base and go after segments of the economy who are not paying any tax at all and earning a fair amount of money. So their contribution to the economy is zero, apart from only paying VAT and excise. And I think that this needs thought before it's implemented, because I fear for some of the smaller traders on this 3% tax.
All right. Let's hear from Jojo Shuri.
I think this 3%, the Finance Bill was signed last year in November, and you could see people are very uncomfortable, especially for people who are in smaller businesses. And of course, as my friend has said, that they tried to introduce it, it failed. So I don't know how possible KRA is going to target these 1.53 million companies to pay the 3%. And it's going to be a tough challenge. Another thing is that they said that initially they had introduced a presumptive tax, 15%. We thought when they introduced this 3%, they'll drop the 15%, but they say they'll do both. But one is the advanced tax. And I think for a business person, that is a big burden, because upfront you pay 15% of licenses, and then you pay another 3%. So, and of course, as you say, these smaller businesses, their margins are also drained. They are small. And maybe this is something they need to rethink. And my discussion also, again, I think we need to encourage these startups, the upcoming businesses, to voluntarily register. But they can only register if there's something for them. They have to feed, as Professor said, feed the cow so that the cow is able to produce milk. And it won't be easy. And that's why you find that the KRA is now frustrated, because they're not able to meet the target. So they are targeting people they think they are not paying a full tax by spending $2 billion to hire 1,000 people to come and sit in the private sector offices to check who is, with accountants, to check who is not paying taxes. And I think they are too aggressive, and this aggression is demotivating entrepreneurs. Last year we saw the same KRA government arresting people who pay billions in taxes. And you find somebody with a tax of 41 billion, you wonder, we are in business. Where is this 41 billion coming from as tax? It doesn't make any sense. Unless, I don't know which business can generate 41 billion tax. And I think there's something that they need to take care of, because harassment doesn't mean that government is going to collect more money. Yes.
All right, let's hear from Bilo.
Yeah, I share the same sentiments, but I want to add that I think what drives all this desire to tax Kenyans is the budget. They want to address the budget deficit. That has been a major challenge. This fiscal deficit has gone up to 9% of some time back, and they've always said we are going every year when the budget is read, we are committed to reducing the deficit to 3%, but it doesn't happen. And it's the biggest challenge, really, that we have. And I think, in my view, our constitution is very clear that the burden of taxation must be shared equitably and fairly between us and the future generation. You cannot say, I want to tax Kenyans to the bone in order to build infrastructure for tomorrow's generation. I think in any country, a decision is always made. The decision is always made by the people on how much money should be left in their pockets and how much they are willing to invest for the future. And if you look at chapter 10 of ours, we made that very clear as one of our key values in the public finance, that the burdens and benefits of the use of resources and public borrowing shall be shared equitably. But we have a situation where when the government says we want to do this for tomorrow, we want to do this for tomorrow, you guys pay the money, pay the money, pay the money. I think that concept really is the biggest challenge we have. So this attempt to try and tax everybody, it's really, I agree, there's nothing to add. It really demotivates the businessman, because it's not just about paying the 3%. It's hassle even getting to pay. If you deal with KRA, the whole process of dealing with KRA itself, administratively and it's emotionally, it's difficult. And you have cash flow problems. You are getting money, yes, you might be running your kiosk, but you have supplied 2 or 3 fellows and you have not been paid. KRA wants his cash. You have challenged. In developed countries, banks lend on trust. You can borrow money on the basis of the furniture in your room.
Yes.
We have a situation where in Africa, or particularly in countries like ours, where even if you have assets and properties and what have you, because of the challenges in securitization of some of these things, the collaterals are not, so the banks are not willing to give you money. And so you have to operate on little money. In fact, most of the people whom they want to tax 3% operate on cash.
Yes.
They're not people who borrow, because banks are not going to lend to them. So then when you have that cash flow problems and you're required to pay upfront, I think it's a challenge. And I think really the government needs to look at the bigger picture is, let us live within let's live within our means. If we live within our means, yes, then you can also, because the legacy is not about just building infrastructure. I think a better legacy is to leave your people happy,
correct,
to leave your people having a better well-being, people having their own resources. You don't have to be feeding people, family relief, and buying. I think the better legacy is to leave Kenyans who are able to spend, who are able to buy a cup of tea, who can send their kids to school, who can pay their school fees. What's the point of taxing this person, and tomorrow you are trying to get again budget to pay fees for his child or her child? It doesn't make sense.
All right. So how let's say from before I ask the next question,
Debarl,
Collins.
you had me sighing because I thought you were skipping me. I think the bigger problem is this thing called turnover tax.
Yes.
Will not solve the problem at all. A friend of mine used to use the word that you are killing a mosquito with a hammer. And I think that is precisely what these people are trying to do. We have a tax hole in the country.
Yes.
But I think you cannot increase the amount of taxes you collect by a punitive approach. It's not possible, because then you make taxation a criminal enterprise. It cannot be. They tried last year. The president had to tell them, no, this cannot work.
Yes.
If you continue making, because for people to pay, if you go to developed democracies, paying tax and the obligation of paying tax is something that people are happy to do, because you know the consequences. Here, it is a crime. It's like extracting a tooth. Like if I don't do it, I will be arrested tomorrow. A friend of mine was telling me, I have to close my small business.
Oh my.
So I asked them, he said, this turnover tax of 3%, I just can't hack it. That thinking is not a thinking of one small business person. It's a thinking of several business persons. And if that is the end result at the end of this year, Debarl, as opposed to plugging the tax hole, will increase the tax hole, because many more will not exist for them to pay. If you look at what has happened, going back to the NSC debate, as the number of big companies closed, initially we just ignored it. Now it has tax implications. In my view, they just need to drop the turnover tax completely. It simply does not make sense to ask people 3%. I think we need to be much more serious on two things. Number one, we need to, as Sachin said, we need to broaden the tax base. Ask ourselves, how do we bring in more players who are not paying? Not how do we collect more from those who are already paying. That's not broadening the tax base. The second, and at the risk of repeating ourselves, we need to start reducing the places we spend our money on beyond austerity measures. That's what we need to do. I think people have even spoken here in the past, as opposed to big four, let's just be honest and say, let's do big one. Because then the pressure is a pressure that increases the amount of things we need to spend money on. That money does not exist. You know, Debarl, in your house, when you find that you have little money, you start dropping things. So I'll drop X, I can't do this, let me do Y first. And I haven't seen us dropping X. Deliberately saying this we are not doing, except austerity measures. And I think that's the place that CS Yatani needs to go in. Lastly, I don't know whether it is the ministry that CS Wamalwa is in charge of, which is also in charge of planning. I don't know which one is the ministry in charge of planning, because I thought that at some point we had a PS of planning a few years ago. We need to hear the role of that planning process much more. The reason why I say so is, unfortunately, since the Jubilee government came into power, planning has been reduced to the back burner. Even the release of the economic, of the development, the plans every year, the economic surveys, is not taken with the seriousness in terms of how it then affects our implementation. And I think that's where we need to go. These reactive processes will not help us. Today you want to increase this because you're trying to plug holes as you go. This idea of doing things as you go is good for an informal process. It's good for a small thing. It is not how you run a country.
Bring out a good point. You know, if you look at the budget the last 3 years, the budget is approved in June. August, 2 months later, the budget is going to be revised. You want to reduce? Supplementary. You approved it in June. In July, no, that budget, something is wrong. We are going to revise austerity. We cut down this, cut down, no money, no expenditure. So it clearly shows you that the planning is not being taken but seriously. I think that's a fact.
The current permanent secretary, and it's now called National Treasury and Planning, in there is Julius Muya, who was head of the planning. So I believe there will probably be better correlation now between the planning and actual treasury function, which is how it should be. But I think one of the reasons why people do not feel they want to pay tax is because they see the fools on this, or we overspent on SGR and we did this, that, the other. So if there is responsible and accountability for the spend, yes, I believe that will attract more taxpayers to the base. Right now, there is complete discomfort with the public to actually accept that the government's actually going to spend my taxes wisely.
Right.
Let me add one point. Sorry. You know, a few years ago, the government, not this government, well, the previous government, they made a deliberate decision to move away from direct taxation to indirect tax, to get more people into the tax. And this is by expanding VAT.
Yes.
And today we have VAT on literally everything, you know, from everything. So all of us, every Kenyan, the 47, one way or the other, you are paying tax through VAT. And VAT is now the largest source of revenue for the government. I think the government should not get the perception that there are people out there in this country who are not paying anything. I think people are paying taxes. I mean, every time you buy your bread, your loaf of bread, or your, you know, everything you're buying, you're paying tax. So it's about how to prudently use the resource. And this is why really the government needs to look at the future and this generation and be fair in terms of how to tax Kenyans. You don't have to really tax people. People are should be allowed to spend some money and have money in their pockets and spend themselves.
Right. So let's try also gravitate the discussion towards now how KRA will try and implement this, because we had this also in the Business Daily yesterday, as I mentioned, that KRA will be posting on workers to tax cheat companies. We may just pick up on that. And this is how they're going to do it. Earlier, I think last year, they said this somewhat spies that KRA will be sending to some of its tax cheat companies. Taxman deploys staff as residence officers to monitor daily sales to some of these companies that, you know, we saw last year, the government really coming down on them as well. So 60 billion shillings is the amount by which KRA missed its target in 3 months to September last year. How is this going to pan out, knowing that you have an officer from KRA within your premises? Initially, it was put as a spy. I don't know now how this is going to shake into place. Do you think this will be such a, you know, a welcome respite, of course, for KRA, but they'll have a first reception on the other end for people who will be now being spied on, so to speak?
Debarl, you can't collect taxes by sending spies to people's companies. For me, this, what they're calling intelligence-led taxation, I think is just...
This is the intelligence-led taxation.
If this is what the Director General of KRA is thinking about, I think for me this is just, sorry, this is madness. Madness because the amount of companies that exist in this country, if you must employ an individual for every country that, for every company that exists, for you to collect money, then we would rather not just collect. Because at the same time, we are telling ourselves we are moving towards IT. We are moving towards IT solutions as a country. Yet our approach is an approach which is 19th century. This idea of movement by walking around, that the only way I can ensure that you are there is my physical presence. If physical presence is the way for enhancing tax collection, we miss it. That's number one. Number two, if criminality is the way for ensuring that there's tax collection, again we miss it, because look at what will happen. First, you just ensure that this guy, either he's bought off, because familiarity breeds contempt.
Yes.
Once he's there every day, you'll find ways. The second, you just say, this guy is there. Let's then just put the foot off the pedal and do things slightly different. People will even stop operating from the companies. For me, I just don't see the logic behind it. It is not sustainable. It will not lead to the desired results.
All right. When you talk about privacy and violation of your privacy, or maybe you are really in my face, where does it really?
I think if you read that carefully yesterday, it's not all businesses.
It's not all the tax cheat companies that we're talking about.
They're targeting high risk on their radar, high risk companies who have been suspected or known of evading tax. I believe tax compliant companies will not have an issue. For those
but
who...
is this the wisest fashion
it's
on how to do
definitely
it?
not. It's an archaic mechanism. It's a sign of desperation, and there are not easily through that. So I believe this is a fishing expedition. It's a sign of desperation for collection, and it will be counterproductive in my opinion.
George,
I think Kenya Revenue Authority, they are under pressure from the executive to collect money to pay debt, as the Prof was saying, and they are looking for all ways of how they can be able to collect money from businesses, from members of the public. But sending those spies may not be the best strategy, because KRA have got all the records. They know people who have bought planes. We can see those planes in Ikisi. They know these people, and these are powerful people who have been getting tenderpreneurs, government tenders.
Yes.
And they can actually track the money that has gone out from government to these suppliers. And those suppliers, of course, we are aware that very few who pay taxes. So they can have better strategies to get these people, because I'm sure they have their records, they have registered companies. So, but hiring 1,000 people, I think is chasing money with other money. So at the end of the day, net effect may not be very good for the nation.
All right. I want to just also to flag, unless Bilo, you have something to say.
I just want to add to that.
Yes.
I think KRA needs to put spies in KRA, not in businesses. Because KRA knows that we all know there are many companies, there are many institutions, there are many businesses that do not pay taxes. One of them that he mentioned is very significant. Majority of these contracts that the government gives out, the money does not come out, and KRA knows. It's not as if they have not been informed. From experience, I know. We've tried to tell KRA, so much contracts have been given out here, and there's supposed to be money that has been deducted for KRA, withholding tax and so forth. They don't, the corruption in KRA is the single most important reason why they are not able to meet the targets. That's the reason, and they know it, they don't want to address that. And because it's a systemic problem in the whole government. And so unless you really deal with that, trying to weaponize or militarize the economy does not change the situation. That fundamentally is that sickness that they need to address.
All right. Maybe also, if you may look, because we're still discussing about revenue collection on that particular paper, we have also down there more than half of counties spend zero on projects. It says, if you may just put it up a bit for you to see, more than half of the counties spent nothing on development in the first quarter to September, hurting job creation and infrastructure project in devolved units. Latest data from the Controller of Budget shows that 25% of the 47 counties failed to spend on items like road revamps, water and sewage network, and also spent in the period when the total spend by all devolved units on the project stood at 1.94. Then we have today's Business Daily. Just a moment, if I might just go there and just pick up the Business Daily to show you where we have these counties collecting 7.7 billion shillings taxes in 3 months, a spike there. So it really flies in the face. If we have counties here, they're spending zero on project items, and we know also they were seeking to list at the NSE where they will have, they'll have municipal bonds seeking money to actually fund these particular projects, and also seek external borrowing as it is right now. What is really happening? Is that the way they should really go? If you're spending zero on this, and then here you're actually seeking for more money?
I think the issue is you're not going to be able to launch any municipal bonds if you don't have your latest audited accounts. So if these counties do not have their latest audited accounts, some of them are 5 years behind, some of them are 3 years behind in their financial reporting, who in their right minds would invest in a municipal bond issued by a county who has not reported their latest financials? So I think the counties need to get their financial reporting house in order, have the latest accounts. I believe maybe a county like Laikipia possibly might meet that criteria. So that could enable the ability to have municipal bonds launched. It's a common feature in the Western market, and you have counties launching municipal bonds for their own development and so on, and which reduces the reliance on government borrowing, on national government borrowing. So municipal bonds is a great idea. The issue is, can the counties get their financial house in order to meet the criteria of launching municipal bonds?
But what is the rhyme or reason for you actually seeking a municipal bond and external borrowing if you're not even spending on these projects in the first place? So how will they, give a healthy status of how they're spending on the projects, Collins?
Debarl, there are several things in the air. The first thing you need to realize that during that period too, this is the time that we had the directive that no new projects, number one.
Yes.
So keep that at the back of your mind. The second is keep at the back of your mind that this was the time people were told, clear all pending bills.
Yes.
So money may just have gone into that kind of thing. For me, I think there are some things one thing that I think is positive. Today's headline, that counties have collected 7.7 billion tax in 3 months, and that is the greatest, even though the increase is marginal. I think the issue about own source revenue has been a concern for a very long time, that counties were only focusing on getting money from the national government, but the money that they were collecting either was too little, in fact in some cases was less than before county governments came, which meant either they were not doing enough or that money was leading into pilfering. To do so I think is useful, but if you are collecting own source revenue from the parking fees and from rates, but at the same time you aren't investing in development, then two problems will arise. Number one is the rationale for counties, which was to address development imbalances across the country, will not be achieved, because you only address those development imbalances if there's development, not if there's recurrent expenditure. But the second, which is more important, is that SMEs, which will require business from counties, will have no business to look for, because counties are only spending on recurrent expenditure. So I think for me, we need to then start asking ourselves, how do we continue with the compliance of the President's directive about no new development projects, and at the same time not stifling development in counties? Because I think if the trend continues where you spend nothing on development, then we'll start asking, do counties only exist for purpose of paying salaries? And I think that would be a dangerous question.
Below.
I think my understanding of the directive by the President was to national government. I don't think it affects the counties. Counties have their own priorities, their own plans. I don't think they're affected by that. But I want to just highlight one point. The law is very clear. At least a county must spend minimum 30% of its funds on development projects. That's the law. And the challenge then is on the control of budget to ensure that, because every penny that is approved for county to withdraw from Treasury must be approved by the controller of budget. And the controller must really look at that balance. When you use requisition for funds, that those funds must reflect that balance, you know, of 30% and 70% for recurrent. So I don't understand how the controller would allow people to draw money for recurrent expenditures only, and then report 3 months later that there was no development project. That was, I think that's something they need to address. Number two, on the issue of the municipal bonds, I think generally not just the municipal bonds, but the power of the county to borrow is, in my view, a long way from being realized, because we don't have an effective legislation really, because the law simply, the constitution simply says that any borrowing by the county must be subject to guarantee by the national government. Obviously, if you go to the stock exchange to get bonds, you have to prepare your prospectus, and I think the investors will look at your prospectus and your ability to pay and all that. I mean, it's subject to so many of those conditions. But I think generally, apart from short-term loans of 12 months, that must be approved by a county assembly from the bank for them to pay salaries. They cannot take loans until we have an appropriate legislation
for the external borrowing. Yes.
Lastly, I want to say that I think we should not really expect counties to raise significant revenues, because the law did not empower counties to charge any tax. The constitution is very clear that all taxes will be collected by the national government. If you look at Article 209, very clearly it says only the national government may impose those taxes. The only thing that a county may impose, it says, is property rates, entertainment taxes, this one's on food and so forth, catering and so forth, and you charge for services. The only thing they can do is charge for different types of services. So I don't expect really county revenues, because they cannot tax.
So the counties, as it is then, from the constitutional point of view, it's crippled in terms of if they want, resources, the delays that have been coming from the government, yet they're not really empowered by the constitution.
I think national government misses the point that, look, we deliberately said that all revenues, all taxes must be collected at national level and then shared out equitably to the counties. But when national government thinks that this is ours, you guys, we cannot be giving, I think national government is really missing the point, and the constitution is very clear on this.
George?
Of course, we are working in the counties, and we have seen the new trend in the counties. If you go to a county like Meru, Kisii, Kajiado, they have actually tripled their revenue, especially on rates, the signages, advertising.
Services.
And what they are doing is that they are automating. So they are able to capture more business people to pay taxes. And of course, we have our own issues in the counties because of double taxation. Maybe you have, your car has got an advert. It crosses Kiambu, and the advert is for Nairobi, for example. They will stop you and say, you have not paid for this. So of course, there are those challenges there. But we are going to see more money, see counties raising more money because of the new ways of automating the correction. The reason why you see they are very aggressive is because for the last couple of months, people have gone without salaries in the counties. And now the governors are rethinking, how can we do to generate our own money? And of course, they have been able to lobby to get more money. I think 2019-2020, they're getting over 370 billion to the counties. And for us in United States, I think we are happy because when they get money, less harassment in the counties. Because when they don't have money, you are delivering materials for construction, they actually pitch at your gate to pay 3,000 per truck. Yes.
Right. Sachin?
I think I agree with Mr. Kero. The counties, there's too much taxation which is raising the cost of product to the consumer because of trading across counties. You cannot have cesses being put into place at different counties just for goods to travel across that county because they are collecting revenues from national government. You do not want to keep on burdening the cost because at the end of the day, what are we talk about our competitiveness. How are we going to improve our competitiveness if we keep on putting levies of this much on flowers to cross this county or on produce across this county and so on? Let's have some sanity in this conversation. When you talk about advertising fees across counties and so on, let's put in a simple mechanism of one national license fee for advertising. You cannot keep paying vehicle fees in Nairobi County, Kiambu County, Nyandarua County, and so on. This is madness, especially, for example, you're transporting bread across. So a lot of companies have actually switched back and just put no branding on their vehicles, and the counties are losing revenues as a result of this.
Right,
But just a small issue. I think, below, counties can impose taxes. I think what is the trouble is double taxation. I think what is the trouble is national government assuming that the money they collect is only theirs. But if you look at Article 209 exhaustively, 209.3, actually 209.1 says counties, it's only national government that impose the following taxes. That's VAT, that's income tax, that's customs duty. But if you go to 209.3, counties may impose property rates, may impose entertainment taxes. If you come to today's headline, today's headline says that they have generated own revenue from things like parking fees, business premises, and land rates. That is what they're. I think what is much more, what requires much more focus, and that's why I agree with both Bill and Sachin, is on two things. Number one is how do we ensure that the money that is generated nationally is generated in a manner that does not stifle, so that people, we don't have a competition between national and county government in terms of I also want to tax. Number two, how do you ensure that the money that is generated both from the national level in terms of the taxes, but also from the county level in terms of own source revenue is actually collected effectively and distributed fairly. I think that's where the focus must be. And the challenge has been on both sides. One, national government assuming the taxes they collect is theirs. County governments assuming that own source revenue is not part of the tax, is not part of the tax regime totality. So those are the two things I think we need to deal with.
FPI is one.
Yes. So yeah, we should also be preparing our headline thoughts briefly as we're winding up. Below.
No, I just want to really, I'm not supporting counties, but I really think that even the Public Finance Management Act is very clear. A county cannot introduce any revenue raising measure in its finance bill without approval from Treasury.
That's true.
And this is because of this provision in Constitution that is very clear, which says the taxation and other revenue raising powers of a county shall not be exercised in a way that prejudices national economic policies, economic activities across county boundaries, or the national mobility of goods, services, capital, and labor in the country. I mean, it's in the Constitution. But because of the pressure, that the counties are under, because you're being told, collect your own revenues by Treasury every day. These guys have started introducing all manner of taxes. And I think that is where the challenge is. And I think there's a law, I'm sure there's a bill.
County own source revenue.
There's a bill I think
in Parliament
one time,
which needs to be fast-tracked and implemented as quickly as possible.
Thank you.
Which should circumvent that.
Right, thank you. Right, so I'll give you a chance to just give your headline thoughts as we're winding up, moving on in 2020, looking at the economy. What is your expectation? Collins Odote, let's begin with you.
I think, Debarl, I will end where I started. That for me, the admission by government that we are in a deep hole is a nice way to start 2020. I think my expectation is that CS Yatani will lead the process of ensuring that we actually cut our clothes according to our size.
Thank you.
And that will require determining what our size is and then determining what clothes we have available for us and then cutting it appropriately.
George.
I think for us, I'll comment on real estate because that's where we are, and we are a bit happier that we have seen some statistics from ICA management survey that the lending this year, 2020, is going to be about 300 billion. Last year we were able to access, private sector. We're able to access about 200 billion across the sector, and of course they say that this 300 billion, about 50 to 100 billion go to SMEs. So we are hoping that our financials are listening, so we are able to borrow and we are able to do business because that was a challenge when we had the capping. Banks were declining the proposals. And of course, we are looking forward to a better year for real estate. And of course, we want to cash in on this affordable housing debate. We cash in there. We have seen the survey by central bank saying that the rate is going to, lending rate is going to increase from 12 to 15%. So we are optimistic that we are going to do more business for real estate this year, 2020.
Right. Bilo?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is for the government to walk the talk. I think the second thing I want to say is that the government probably needs to expand the stimulus that they have rolled out yesterday to other sectors, not just to other regions, not just to some specific regions and the specific sectors. I think we have challenges in many sectors and in many parts of the country, and they need to expand that. And lastly, I think the government also needs to come up with clear policies on the issue of borrowing.
Thank you.
Without limiting that borrowing, I don't think we'll resolve this challenges of the economy.
Thank you. Finally, Sergeant.
Bill Clinton came into power with a saying called "It's the economy, stupid." I believe we're at that inflection point here that we just need to talk. We need to hold a national economic summit and talk about the economy and how to make it better. Overall, I sense cautious optimism for the manufacturing sector, and I believe with the right team in place and with the right implementation, we will get far.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to appreciate all of you this morning for that very cogent discussion we just had, of course, on looking at the state of economy. And we look forward, yes, to some of the suggestions that if the government may also hold a national economic summit to just thrash out what is happening with the economy right now. And we mentioned that NSE has not listed any company in the last 10 years. I think the Econ is one of them in the bonds, the green bonds that we just had, I think, this week as well. That was also wonderful. But we're looking also forward to them also listing more in this decade. And that also we shall be discussing also much later next week in the market as well. Thank you for your valued company. I can see lots of reactions here on Twitter. Just read one of it before I wind up. We have Free Kenya, Nicholas Oyo saying, how come budgets are block budgets? That's where entertainment and other such costs get hidden. Line by line budget should be lit. And also we have Samuel Oruto saying, CS Ukuretani need to give us promises. We already have promises. Need not to give us promises. We already have promises from past finance CS on tough austerity measures on the craft. What we need is real action from him, nothing else. Thank you very much for your valued company. I am Debarl Inea.